So we want to thank everyone for traveling with us today on our journey, our climate medicine journey, and honoring the health professionals who are in this space. If we remember when we started earlier, of course, we started with a poem talking about healing. And we've seen that healing process throughout the day. We talked about earth, wind, and fire. We also made sure that we honored our indigenous brothers and sisters and the traditional environmental knowledge that they bring forward. We made sure that health equity was also a part of this journey. We brought in biodiversity and the sets of opportunities and the impacts that are happening, but how we get in front of what's going on. And we made sure also that the amazing group of climate docs also were sharing with us the things that they have put in place to be able to build partnership and to make sure that we're moving forward in a positive direction. I am reminded of the words of Dr. King when he said, in the end, it will not be the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. As we move forward, we understand that those who have been focused on climate denial are shrinking day by day by day, and that our friends are raising their voices, that they are making sure that they are part of the process to ensure that we are addressing the climate crisis that we have in front of us, but also getting ahead of that. Make sure people have the education that they need to make real change happen. As we close out, I want to thank everyone here at the Entertainment and Cultural Pavilion. And we're going to actually share some things here in 1 second about the E&C Pavilion, which has been hosting amazing content all week. We know that our docs also, I'm just blessed that I got a chance to see all these amazing docs who do poetry and music and other forms of art. I hope the folks who have been watching online are able to see the amazing imagery that is surrounding this room, showing all the pictures of both how folks are making change happen and the impacts that we still have to address. This is a transformational moment, and this journey may be ending here this evening just for a quick moment, but we understand the set of work that still has to go on as we move forward, and we have a totally new set of partners. So COP28, we have been here. We have actually been able to engage on a number of amazing individuals, folks from Australia sharing the traditional knowledge that's there, the Aboriginal knowledge that's been going on for 65,000 years, to folks who are newer in this space. So with that being said, remember that we are blessed and we are highly favored. Oh, and we still have one more presentation. You see, a brother was like, you know what, we've been going since 9 a.m. And I'm here at dinner calling, but no, we still are blessed that we have one more amazing presentation that is going to take us to the promised land. So with that being said, I'm going to bring forward folks who are going to talk to us about the Lancet countdown. The countdown is important because a countdown is what I was just going through because it gets you to that special place. So let me bring forward the amazing individuals who are going to share some of that information. So if you can come forward, my brother, I'm going to pass the mic to all of you.
Well, good. Okay. Thank you so much for staying to the end. This is a great pleasure. So I wanted to start off by thanking the organisers, first of all, for having us here at the end of today. We know that it's been a very long day, so we're going to try and make this short and sweet. So we're here to talk about the Lancet Countdown, Oceania, talking about health and climate change experts, communication, culture, and last but not least, poetry of the human enterprise. So joining me today, my name is Paul Beeks. I'm from Macquarie University in Sydney. We have Francis Nona from the Queensland University of Technology and Adi Vyas from the University of Sydney. So what brings us together today, as in myself, Francis and Adi? I wanted to say what we have in common, and we all have a passion for health and climate change, and in particular, the urgent need to dramatically accelerate the adaptation and mitigation of the adverse impacts of climate change. So we have a passion in that area. we're all Australian, as you heard in the introduction. So we're from the south, the great land. But we are also very diverse, and I've learned through my career working with big teams that diversity is a strength. And I think you'll see some of that diversity come out over the coming 15 minutes or so. So, without further ado, I have great pleasure in introducing Francis. So, Francis is a proud man from the Torres Strait who is a lecturer and a researcher at the Queensland University of Technology, and he has worked in as a registered nurse and director of an Indigenous community-controlled health service. He comes from the Torres Strait to the far northeast of Australia, and I have the honour of asking Francis to take the floor for the next 5 minutes or so. Over to you, Francis.
Wow, what an opportunity and what a great pavilion sitting in the entertainment and culture. But before I start, I speak in my tongue from the lands of Torres Strait, Zeretkes as we know it. And as I start to identify who I am, and I'm a descendant of the Daybao clan. My totems are the Eighth Kadal and the Malubaida, which is the crocodile and the shark. I'm also a registered nurse. I've done a master's in public health, majoring in Indigenous health, and I'm now a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland in the Faculty of Medicine. My interest is climate and health, but the two identities that I have shown to you, only you can relate to one, and that would be the second. But the first doesn't make it any less valuable. And I think when I was given an opportunity to talk about 5 minutes is to talk about relationality, and relationality within climate adaptation and climate mitigation. We all have a role, and we've got to find that way of relating to each other's and each other's standpoint when we do this. So I set the cultural interface. The cultural interface sits with me as an Indigenous person and a non-Indigenous person. Whether it's delivering healthcare, it's beyond the number. What's the relationality of delivering healthcare? The way that I wanted to set the scene, I wrote 2 poems, and I thought to myself, how do I talk about the cultural interface as my identity in my professional reading, but also my Indigenous identity? And the first one is, when we talk about the cultural interface, we have, the Western ideology and an Indigenous ideology, and we've got to meet in that cultural interface. We like to think that it's an equilibrium, it's an equal space, but unfortunately it's not. It's oblique with one ways of knowing. And we've got to really start to relate to that Indigenous people have so much to contribute. So to go back to my Indigenous identity, I wrote this poem. My PhD is set on it, and you'll see the very thing of my Indigenous identity in the way that I relate to country or Mother Earth. So the poem is written on behalf of my mother, my late mother. It's why I became a registered nurse. The poor health outcomes for First Nations people is well documented. I want to participate in closing that gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So I wrote this poem because I wanted to advocate for First Nations people. And this poem goes, Ode to my mother's country. Warm sand presses soft against my bare feet. Balmy breeze gently caresses my face. My footprints go where sand and sea meet, following my ancestors, part of this place. My heritage, my birthright. The sea and the land, this place is too, my mother. She also guides me still. Both mothers comfort and hold my hand, caught between 2 cultures, dreams to fulfill. No matter how far in this world I do roam, there are ancestors calling me. Voices strong, reminding my soul, Torres Strait is my home, my mother's country, where I truly belong. And that poem really sets the scene of my identity, that how we see the world. So this is the cultural interface. I'm coming from my identity. But when I move across into that cultural interface where we can both meet, I wrote another poem just to try and set the scene. And that poem is how we've got to come together in that cultural interface as a call to support sovereignty in all climate and health work. So this poem that I wrote for this event goes, Western societies operating as individuals, trying to live like whole communities under capitalism. Indigenous societies live and operate in communities, being forced to live like segregated individuals under capitalism. capitalist societies calling the current world utopia. We all need to recognise. Indigenous communities receiving the current world as dystopia. Let's decolonise. Our governments creating policies as the bridges to the two worlds, but are in fact only dividing the two. In all of this, our capitalist systems need to break, but not at the cost of First Nations people. So in closing, let's start with supporting sovereignty and custodianship of Indigenous people in the work and research we do. Miniki Mesu, in my language, I want to say a very big thank you. My 5 minutes is up, but I just want to try and set the scene of that cultural interface. So as we move on for mitigation and adaptation strategies, let's work together for a greater cause for all people. Ki Mesu, thank you.
Thank you so much, Francis. Okay, so I'm now going to introduce myself. So as I said, my name is Paul Beggs. I'm an Associate Professor at the School of Natural Sciences at Macquarie University in Sydney. I'm also the Director of the Lancet Countdown Oceania. And I've been working in this space for a long time. So I started working on health and climate change in the early 1990s. So that's giving away my age to some extent. But it's great to be here at COP28 with a dedicated health day and also this medical and climate day. So I'm going to talk a bit about the Lancet Countdown Oceania, but also some of the communication and cultural aspects that we've brought into the Lancet Countdown Oceania. So the Lancet Countdown Oceania is one of a number of regional centres of the Lancet Countdown. So we have a centre in Asia, Europe, South America, and also a small island developing states regional centre, and we're establishing a regional centre in Africa as we speak. So for those who are not familiar with the Lancet Countdown, we are a very big international research collaboration. So we do monitoring, tracking of health and climate change across a broad range of indicators, but we also engage directly with policy, and engagement with communications and outreach is another major area that we go into. So I'll come back to that in a moment. So we look at health and climate change holistically. So of course we look at the impacts of climate change, but we also look at the fundamental responses to that, so adaptation and also the health benefits of mitigation. And importantly, we look at the economic and political context in which all of these impacts and so on are occurring. And as I said, we annually track indicators across all of these areas. So it's just one example of the indicators that we've developed. This is the indicator for Indigenous health and climate change, and it's unique to the Lancet Countdown Oceania. No other Lancet Countdown group has this indicator at the moment. So this is particularly important for Australia's First Nations people. And the indicator that we developed back in 2021 focused on the vulnerability of that group, and Francis talked about that vulnerability and the disparity in health outcomes for Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. So that indicator looks at a range of vulnerability measures, so levels of pre-existing disease, so respiratory, cardiovascular, access to healthcare, levels of overcrowded housing, and so on. So some of those measures are slowly getting better over time, some are getting worse over time, some are not changing at all, but they're all too high. They're much higher than you would see for the non-Indigenous community within Australia. So that's a gap that we desperately need to close within Australia. And we're actually developing another Indigenous indicator, and that's using collaboration with our Indigenous colleagues, and it's going to be very much based on community-driven and derived measures. So just to finish up, focusing on that communication and outreach aspect, which really applies to the entertainment and culture pavilion. So we have an annual launch event, and I wanted to tell you a story about our launch event last year. We thought we would spice things up a bit, and we brought in a comedian. So Dan Illick, I don't know if you've heard about Dan Illick, he's an Australian comedian, and he is passionate about climate change and many other environmental causes and social causes. So Dan told the story of his frustration in the lead up to COP26 in Glasgow. that we had an Australian Prime Minister who was not doing a lot about climate change, and he really wanted that Prime Minister to go to COP26 and face the music. So he thought creatively, how can I get a Prime Minister to go to a COP when he doesn't want to go? So he thought, okay, well, I need to be a bit provocative and I need to put that provocation on a world stage. So he put together some billboards and thought, where do I put these? And where is the biggest stage perhaps in the world? New York Times Square. So he priced putting up a billboard in New York Times Square, and it's rather expensive. So he thought, I'm going to crowdsource this. And he got the money within 2 hours. Okay. So he got the money really easily. And this was the sort of billboard that he put together. So this was the propagation. And there were several like this. And this, in fact, did display in New York Times Square in the lead up to COP26. So our Prime Minister at the time was in the lead up to this campaign not going to COP26. An hour after this campaign in New York Times Square, there was an announcement that our Prime Minister was going to COP26. So I think this is a nice demonstration of the power of creativity, of people power as well, to raise the funding for this display of provocation. So that was our launch event last year. So I wanted to share that with you. We also do a huge amount of media work. And of course, it's not enough to do the research. We need to get that message out to people in policy and the broader community. So at our annual launches of our reports, we do a huge amount of media work. We get our message out to social media and so on. So this is just an altmetric snapshot showing the spread of the work that we put out each year. So our report has been primarily focused on Australia, but you can see in terms of tweets, X we now call it, it went far beyond Australia. So our report was being talked about in North America, South America, Asia, Europe, and so on. And just to give you a feel for some of the media that we've had in Australia and around the world, we hit both the mainstream and the non-mainstream media. This is just a few of the articles that came out about our reports in recent times. So very much talking about Australia's ill preparation for the health impacts of climate change. And I think it's some of this work and some of this media coverage that has led to the release of the first National Health and Climate Strategy for Australia, which was released here at COP28. And that is a strategy that's being very much applauded by other countries at the moment. And someone just told me that even the US is looking at that strategy as a role model. So I would like to think that the Lancet Countdown Oceania and Australia has had something to do with urging the Australian government to put that strategy together. So I will leave it there and hand you over to my wonderful colleague, Addy. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about Addy. So those of you who have seen Addy at COP28, and he has been everywhere, know that like Francis, he is an amazing performer. So Addy is a public health physician, but he's also the Deputy Director of the World Health Organization Collaborating Centre for Climate Change and Health Impact Assessment at Curtin University in Perth, Australia. And very special to me, he is the inaugural Lancet Countdown Oceania Fellow based at the University of Sydney and generously supported by the Health and Climate Foundation. So without further ado, I will hand over to Addy.
Thank you, Paul, for those ever kind words. And it's been a joy working with you. We've known each other only for months, I think. And Francis, same thing. We've known each other for days, probably. No, it's months. Folks, I'm a doctor by training. And when I went to university in medical school, I did two things, I think. I did many things. But one thing is I studied and I got my degree. The other thing's that I wrote poems. But today I'm not going to perform anything of my own. At the time, I met I wrote poems for my girlfriend. That same woman I followed on a holiday. She was working in Bhutan, the Himalayan kingdom in the mountains, the land of happiness, right? Gross national happiness is their thing. But anyway, I went to a pub one day and I met this guy. He looked like a sage, Bhutanese fellow, short man, scruffy beard. This is him. Okay? So I'm going to read one of his poems. Met him in a pub. He gave me a book. And the way this relates to what I do in my work, I'm a public health doctor. So we don't treat individual patients, we treat entire communities, and we work with systems. Okay, so this poem is called System of a Frown. And there's a few people smiling because there's a band with a somewhat similar name. It's a heavy metal band. So here's the poem. The system is you and me. We're the system to each and every degree. There's no other system. The species are one, even in disarray. We are that someone that makes the system groan or hum. We talk about the system like it's really there, away from you and me, like some nightmare happening without your approval in a bed elsewhere. But we are the system. We are the world, either living like a saint or living like a whore, living wild or living like a bore, wanting less or needing more and more. There's no other system, there's no other enemy. We are individuals looking at our own collective dichotomy, fighting it, contradicting it at every junction and every opportunity. And reliving it, giving it names such as caring friend or ruthless enemy, when all that's happening is the birth of yet another system in a mental sphere of derisive activity. When I think of a system, my mind conjures up a machine out there to get me, that I'm somehow the conjurer is never mentioned, much less understood. When I'm high up on a mountain, I see the plains below, and when I'm down below, I see the mountains high above. That mountain hasn't moved, and neither has the plains. My mind is motion, and when I don't see that, I hear the commotion out of the depth with the underlying caution of instant disturbance where everything's seemingly a hiss, the slow revelation that nothing's ever amiss, that it's the current system of your own mind at play, can never be dismissed. The only thing that's ever at its own ease, the rest is a flaw, a guffaw. The system is an idea and a concept that works as a seesaw, if ever. It's the only way it can work. The rest is pointless edge. Perfection is frail by nature. Utopia is a rusted nail longing for a merciless hammer, and the hammer is a jacked creature. The carpenter long racked, now smiling up from the gallows, his body hung, his head dangling in shame at the wicked ploys and the plays of a most persistent system which, if it ever did exist, would justify it all. But alas, it never did. What mockery and what relief! Echoing the words of Leonard Cohen, we are not mad, we are human. We want to love, and someone must forgive us for the paths we take to love, for the paths are many and dark, and we are ardent and cruel in our journey. This is a hard poem to read out. I think we all feel this, right? We all feel this. We're here at COP. We care deeply about what we're doing. But there's hope in all of this. There is hope. Isn't that all we have? I think that's all we have. So thank you for listening. We've shared with you some wonderful things. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Francis. This has been what we do in our little corner of the world. And it's been a delight to be here with you today. Thank you. Thank you.